The key went in clean. That's what I can't stop thinking about. 2 years of rain and Tennessee winter, and the lock on the main entrance of the Whitfield building turned like I'd oiled it yesterday. I stood on the front step with my pack still on my shoulders and the key already rotated. And the glass door drifted open against my knuckles, and I thought, that's wrong. I almost turned around. I should have. My name is Nora Kavanaugh. I'm 31 years old. Before the outbreak, I was a data operations manager at a healthcare logistics company headquartered on the 7th floor of a building that no longer has a 7th floor. I had a corner office. I had a view of the Cumberland River from the east window and the Nissan Stadium from the north. And I had opinions about both. I drove a leased Volvo. I meal prepped on Sundays. I owned one succulent I was confident I could keep alive, and I was right about that for 3 years running. I lived at 4C, the Whitfield building, 118 2nd Avenue, South Nashville, Tennessee. A one-bedroom with 9-foot ceilings and exposed brick I paid too much for because I liked the way the afternoon light hit the kitchen counter around 4 o'clock. I'd been gone from it for 25 months. The lobby smelled like dust and old carpet glue. The elevator was dead. That was expected. I took the stairs. The stairwell was darker than I remembered, but the handrail was solid under my palm. And the fire door on the 4th floor still had the dent from when maintenance had wedged a dolly into it. Wrong 2 months before everything ended. I stood in front of 4C. The hallway was intact. Not just intact clean. I mean, dust, sure. Thin film on the baseboard. But no debris. No forced entry damage on any of the doors I'd passed. No spray paint. No biohazard markings. No FEMA tape. The building should have been cleared, searched, marked, and gutted sometime in those first months. Every residential building in the downtown corridor had been. I'd seen their skeletons from a distance on my way in, kicked-in doors hanging from hinges, windows covered in black X's, the shorthand alphabet of the dead. But not this hallway, not this floor. I put the key in the deadbolt. It turned clean. I put the key in the knob. It turned clean. I opened the door to my apartment. The lights were off, but the curtains were open. And the July sun was doing exactly what it had always done. Pressing through the south-facing window and painting the kitchen counter in a long gold stripe. The succulent was gone. But the pot was still there. Washed, sitting centered on the sill. The apartment was furnished. My furniture, my couch, my kitchen table, my bar stools. The bed through the open bedroom door was made. Not just made tight hospital corners, the duvet I'd bought at West Elm pulled flat without a wrinkle. The refrigerator was off, but the door was propped open the way you leave it when you're preventing mold. There was a folded towel on the counter. The sink was empty and dry. Someone had been here, not once, not to loot. Someone had been maintaining this apartment. I dropped my pack in the hallway and unholstered the pistol I'd carried from Cookville and stood in the center of my own living room with a gun pointed at nothing, and my throat closing, and my mind running diagnostics on a building that should have been a carcass. I'll tell you why I came back. People want a poetic answer. They want me to say I missed home, that I dreamed of the light on the counter, that after 25 months of survival camps and convoy routes and the long grind of Reconstruction-era Tennessee, some magnetic thread pulled me south to the city I'd fled. That's not it. I came back because the Nashville Provisional Authority posted utility restoration lists by district as they brought the grid back online, block by block. I'd been working intake logistics at the Cookville Regional Coordination Center, not saving lives, just processing forms, matching names to COTS, the tedious infrastructure of aftermath. And one afternoon, Standing at the bulletin board during a shift break, I saw the updated list for Davidson County, District 12, and I saw my building's address with a notation I didn't understand. Active account, current. Not restored pending. Not municipal hold. Active, current. Someone had been paying the electric bill on my apartment. My apartment, Unit 4C. The account was in my name. I asked the clerk. She pulled it up. The account had never lapsed. 25 months of grid collapse and rolling blackouts and infrastructure triage, and somehow, through the provisional billing system that replaced TES during reconstruction, someone had maintained a payment schedule on a one-bedroom apartment belonging to a woman who was 60 miles away filing intake paperwork for strangers. That's why I came back. Not for the apartment, for the answer. I cleared the rooms the way I'd learned to clear rooms, which is to say badly, with too much adrenaline and not enough technique. I checked the closet. I checked behind the shower curtain. I checked the narrow pantry where I used to keep canned soup and protein bars and a bottle of bourbon I pretended was decorative. Empty. All of it. Whoever had been here wasn't here now. I holstered the gun and sat on the couch, my couch. It still had the shallow depression on the left cushion where I always sat. I pressed my palm into it and felt the foam given a shape that remembered me. The apartment wasn't untouched. It was curated. Little things were different. The books on the shelf had been reorganized, not alphabetically, but by height, tallest to shortest, which is how no one arranges books. The bathroom had a fresh bar of soap in the dish, still wrapped in its paper, the kind of plain white rectangle you'd find in a relief supply kit. The kitchen drawer where I'd kept takeout menus and loose batteries now held a small flashlight, a box of waterproof matches, and a folded city map with several intersections circled in pencil. The circles were around water distribution points. I recognized 2 of them from the Nashville PA's early recovery postings. Whoever had been here wasn't squatting. They were outfitting the apartment for someone's return. For my return. I found the first note at 6:15 that evening. I'd been sitting on the couch for nearly an hour, not moving, not eating, just watching the light change on the counter the way I used to when I got home from work and needed 5 minutes before I could become a person again. Old habit. The body remembers what the mind would rather not. The note was taped to the inside of the medicine cabinet, which I didn't open until I went to wash my face. A small rectangle of white paper, torn from a legal pad, written in blocky handwriting that wasn't mine. It said, "Water heater is gas. Pilot instructions on the unit. Tank should be full." I flushed the lines in April. No signature, no date, just instruction, clean and practical, as if left by a thoughtful landlord for a tenant arriving on move-in day. I stared at the note for a long time. Then I went back to the kitchen and opened every cabinet. The dishes were mine, the glasses were mine. But the food was not. 3 cans of black beans, 2 cans of chicken, a sealed bag of rice, a jar of peanut butter with a distribution stamp from the Provisional Authority. Someone had stocked the kitchen, not heavily, not like a bunker, but like a welcome, like a first night's groceries. I found the second note inside the fuse box beside the front door, which I checked because I'm the kind of person who checks fuse boxes. It said, "Breakers 3 and 7 are the kitchen and bedroom. Others trip intermittently. Don't trust 5. Same handwriting, same paper, same eerie civility." The third note was under the bathroom sink, taped to the pipe. Slow drip on the hot side. Tightened it, but the washer is worn. Bucket underneath if it starts again. I sat on the bathroom floor with the note in my hand, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 2 years that wasn't fear or grief or the dull administrative numbness that had become my operating system in Cookville. I felt invaded, not threatened invaded. the way you feel when someone has read your journal. When someone has been inside your private architecture and rearranged it with care. And the care is what makes it unbearable. Because here is what I understood, sitting on that tile floor. Whoever did this knew me. Not personally, maybe. But they knew which apartment was mine. They knew my utility account. They knew how to access the building without force. And they had been here not once, but repeatedly flushing water lines, stocking food, checking breakers, leaving instructions with the working assumption that I was coming back. Nobody assumes that. Not after 2 years, the survival rate for Nashville proper during the first 6 weeks of the outbreak was estimated at 11% by the PA's Demographic Reconstruction Office. And most of those survivors evacuated during the military corridor window in week 3. The people who stayed died or went feral or ended up in the fortified zones along the river. Nobody goes back to a dead woman's apartment and pays her electric bill for 2 years on the assumption she'll walk through the door, unless they need her to. I slept in my own bed that night. First time in 25 months. The sheets smelled like nothing. No detergent, no body, no mildew. Just clean cotton and still air. I lay on my back and stared at the ceiling and listened to the building breathe around me, the old sounds of pipes settling, and something ticking in the wall that I remembered from before. And I kept the gun on the nightstand, and I did not sleep for a long time. When I finally did, I dreamed I was filling out intake forms for myself. Name, date of birth, next of kin. And the form kept asking a question I couldn't answer. Who is expecting you? I want to be honest about who I was before the outbreak, because it matters for what comes later. I was good at my job. I was good at my job the way certain people are good at their jobs completely, consumingly, at the expense of almost everything else. I managed data systems for a company that routed medical supplies across the Mid-South. I optimized. I streamlined. I made things efficient. I was promoted twice in 3 years. My boss called me the machine, and I let him because I thought it was a compliment. I had friends. I had happy hours and a running group. And a woman named Val, who'd been my college roommate and still called me every Sunday. I had a mother in Murfreesboro and a brother in Chattanooga and a father who'd been dead since I was 19. I had all the architecture of a life. But if I'm being precise about it, and precision is the thing I'm best at, the thing that made me valuable and the thing that made me leave, I had arranged my life so that no single person in it was load-bearing. Everyone was modular. Everyone could be removed without the structure collapsing. I think I did that on purpose. I think I'd been doing it since my father died, building a life where no single loss could break the frame. And then the outbreak came, and I discovered exactly what that architecture was worth. It was worth a clean evacuation. When the first reports hit Nashville day 1, the hospital overflows. The footage from Memphis, the governor's stammering press conference. I was already packing, not panicking, packing. I had a go bag in my closet, not because I was a prepper, because I was an optimizer. I'd read an article once about 72-hour preparedness kits, and I'd assembled one the way I assembled everything. Thoroughly, dispassionately, and alone. I was in my car by midnight. I drove northeast. I did not call my mother until I was past Lebanon, 40 minutes out. And when she answered, I gave her the Cookville address I was headed to and told her to leave Murfreesboro. She said she would. I didn't confirm that she did. I didn't loop back. I didn't drive south to get her. She made it out. She's in the Tullahoma recovery zone now. I know that. But I didn't know it for 8 months. And during those 8 months, I processed intake forms for other people's mothers, and I did not go looking for mine. My brother Garrett, I didn't call at all. I told myself the towers were overloaded. They were. But I had a window. I had 10 minutes on I-40 where my phone showed 2 bars and I could have called him. And instead I called my office's emergency voicemail line and left a message for my manager about the server backup schedule. I'm telling you this so you understand. I am the person who left, cleanly, efficiently, without looking back. I removed myself from the city the way I'd have removed a corrupted file from a system flagged, quarantined, deleted. And I rebuilt in Cookville, inside the bureaucratic scaffolding of recovery. And I was useful there, genuinely useful. And I never once drove back to Nashville to see what I'd left behind. Until the bulletin board, until those 2 words, active, current. Someone had kept my life running while I was gone. And the part of me that should have felt grateful, instead, felt caught. Like a machine that has been watched without knowing it. Like a clean evacuation that turns out to have been observed, recorded. And this is the word that kept circling, anticipated. I don't know why that felt worse than anything in 2 years of aftermath. But it did. I spent 3 days cataloging the apartment. I know how that sounds. People survive the end of the world, and they catalog their apartments. But I'm telling you that this is what I do. This is the only thing I've ever been able to do. When the ground shifts, I inventory. I map. I make the unknown known by breaking it into pieces small enough to label. Day 1, I mapped the notes. 7 total, all on the same legal pad paper, all in the same blocky print. Fuse box, water heater, bathroom pipe. A note inside the bedroom closet explaining that the window latch had been repaired with a shim and not to force it. A note on the back of the front door listing the building's emergency exits and which stairwell doors still opened freely. A note taped under the kitchen table. Found it on my hands and knees, reading simply, "Floor grout near the stove is loose. Careful barefoot." And one more. Tucked into the spine of a book on the shelf, a used copy of a project management manual I'd kept from a professional certification course. The note said, "This was the only book I moved. It was on the nightstand. I needed the table clear for the lamp." That one took something from me. Not the words, the image. Someone standing in my bedroom, picking up a book I'd left on the nightstand the night I evacuated, carrying it to the shelf, and then feeling the need to explain, to apologize for the displacement. The care in that gesture was so specific, so respectful of boundaries that no longer existed in any functional sense, that I had to sit down. Day 2, I checked the building. Floors 1 through 6. My floor was 4. The apartments I could access, maybe half, had unlocked or damaged doors were gutted. Looted, stripped, some scorched. 2B had been used as a latrine. 5A had dried bloodstains on the carpet that told a story I didn't stay to read. The building had been hit, searched, picked over, and abandoned like every other residential tower in the district. Except my floor. Except the 4th floor, where every apartment door was closed and intact, and the hallway was clean. And the overhead light I tested it still worked on breaker. Someone had protected this floor, not fortified it. There were no barricades, no reinforcements. But the stairwell doors on 3 and 5 had been fitted with simple latch locks, the kind you'd buy at a hardware store. Not enough to stop a determined intruder, enough to slow a wandering, infected. Day 3. I went to the building manager's office on the ground floor. The door was locked, but the lock was cheap, and I'd watched enough people defeat cheap locks in 2 years to know the trick with a credit card. The office was small, dusty, and largely intact. Filing cabinet in the corner. I pulled the drawer for the 4th floor. The tenant files were there. Mine was on top. Lease agreement, move-in checklist, copy of my driver's license. And clipped to the front, a single sheet of paper that was not part of any original file. It was a payment ledger, handwritten, monthly entries, beginning October of the outbreak, year roughly 6 weeks after I'd left. Each entry listed a date, an amount, and a 4-digit code that I recognized, after staring at it for 10 minutes, as a utility account reference number. My account reference number. 23 entries, 23 months of payments. The amounts varied slightly, some months higher, some lower, tracking what must have been the provisional rate fluctuations as Nashville rebuilt its billing grid. Whoever did this wasn't just paying blindly. They were tracking the rates, adjusting. The last entry was dated 3 weeks ago. At the bottom of the ledger, in the same blocky handwriting, was a single line. She will come back when the grid reaches her district. Monitor the restoration lists. I read that line 4 times. Then I folded the ledger and put it in my jacket pocket and walked out of the office and sat on the front step of the Whitfield building and watched the street. Nashville was still mostly dead in this district, a few reconstruction crews visible in the distance, a supply truck idling at the corner of 2nd and Commerce, but the silence here was different from the silence I'd come through. It was a maintained silence, a kept silence, like a room someone had been cleaning for a woman who didn't know she was expected. I need to tell you about the walk from Cookeville. 3 days on foot and 1 on the back of a National Guard cargo truck that was running supply drops along the I-40 corridor. The Guard had gotten friendlier in the 2nd year. Reconstruction made allies of everyone. They didn't ask why I was headed to Nashville. I told them I had a housing claim to file, which was technically true. The corridor between Cookeville and Nashville had been cleared in the military sense, main roads swept. Abandoned vehicles pushed to the shoulders, infection zones burned or fenced but cleared doesn't mean safe. It means the probability has shifted from certain to possible. You still carried a weapon. You still slept in shifts if you were with someone. And if you were alone, you slept with your back to a wall and one eye on the door. I was alone. I'd left Cookeville without telling anyone at the coordination center. Just walked off shift, packed my bag, and started walking. My supervisor, a retired postal worker named Dennis, who ran the intake desk with the quiet authority of a man who'd spent 30 years delivering mail in all weather, would notice I was gone within 12 hours and would mark me AWOL within 24. He wouldn't come looking. That wasn't how things worked anymore. People left. You noted it. You moved on. The thing I saw on the 2nd day is relevant. I was cutting through a rest stop east of Lebanon. The rest stop had been converted to a way station during the 1st-year supply cache, message board, water point, and then abandoned when the supply line shifted north. It was empty now, or should have been. I came around the back of the main building, and there was a man sitting on the concrete pad where the vending machines used to be. And he was feeding a dog. Not unusual. People fed dogs. But this man was feeding the dog from a can of food that he'd clearly been saving, and his hands were shaking, and he was talking to the animal in a low, continuous murmur that I recognized immediately as the sound of someone who hadn't spoken to a human being in a very long time. I almost kept walking. That is the truth. My architecture is built for clean movement, and I almost kept moving. I didn't. I sat down 6 feet away and asked him if the water point was still active. It wasn't, he said, but there was a creek a 1/4 mile south that ran clean. His name was Orrin. He was 58. He'd been a session guitarist on Music Row before the outbreak, which meant he'd been a strange combination of very talented and very broke. He'd ridden it out in a storage unit off Gallatin Road for the 1st year and then migrated east when the unit complex was overrun. He'd been on the road since. We talked for 20 minutes. He didn't ask where I was going. I didn't offer. But he said something that lodged in me and that I carried the rest of the way to Nashville. He said he'd gone back to his old apartment in Inglewood the previous fall, just to see, and found that someone had cleaned out his unit and left a note on the door that read, "Cleared, no remains." And he said the strange thing was that the note made him feel worse than finding a body would have, because a body would have been evidence that someone had been there in the end. And the note just meant a stranger had confirmed his absence and moved on. Worst thing in the world, Oren said, still feeding the dog, is finding out nobody was waiting. I left the rest stop an hour later. I didn't tell Oren about my apartment or the active utility account, but I carried his sentence like a stone in my chest, and it pressed harder with every mile, because what I had was the opposite of Oren's note. Someone had been waiting. Someone was still waiting. And I couldn't decide if that was the best thing in the world or the most terrifying. On day 4 in the apartment, I went looking. Not blindly. I took the ledger and the notes, and I did what I do. I systematized. The handwriting was consistent one person. The supply items were from PA distribution, which meant someone with access to Reconstruction-era provisions. The utility payments required an account number and a billing address, which meant someone with either access to municipal records or prior knowledge of my tenancy. The building modifications stairwell latches, maintained hallway, flushed water lines meant someone with tools, basic maintenance knowledge, and repeated physical access over a long period. I started with the building. The Whitfield had 16 units. I'd checked most of them. I went back and checked them all. 12 were empty and damaged. 2 were sealed tight, dead-bolted from outside, no sign of entry. 1, 4A, directly across the hall from mine, I'd skipped because its door was closed and I'd been focused on my own unit. I knocked. Silence. I tried the knob. Locked. I knelt and looked at the base of the door. Clean floor. No dust accumulation against the threshold. Someone had been opening this door recently enough to prevent the buildup. I picked the lock. It took me 8 minutes and a bent piece of wire from the stairwell latch. And I'm not proud of how long it took, but I am proud that I could do it at all. Because 2 years ago, I could not have picked a lock. And the fact that I can now is a small, ugly monument to everything that's changed. 4A was occupied. Not currently, no one inside, but actively. A sleeping bag on the bare floor, a small camp stove, a jug of water, a stack of legal pads, the same yellow paper as the notes in my apartment, a pencil, worn to a stub, sitting on top, and on the wall, taped at eye level, a photograph. Me, my company headshot, the one from the healthcare logistics website. Professional smile, navy blazer, hair that took 40 minutes. It had been printed on regular paper, probably from a cached web page. The resolution was rough and the colors were slightly off, and it was taped to the wall of apartment 4A at the exact height where someone sleeping on the floor would see it first thing upon waking. I stood in that apartment and looked at my own face on the wall and felt something drain out of me. Not fear, revulsion. Not revulsion at being watched, at being kept, at being an image on a wall in an empty room where someone slept on the floor and maintained my apartment across the hall like a shrine. I took the photograph down. I folded it and put it in my pocket next to the ledger. Then I searched the rest of the unit. The legal pads were mostly blank. One had entries in the same blocky handwriting, dates, brief notations. Checked 4C, flushed kitchen line. Replaced bulb in hall. Stairwell latch 3 loose, retightened. Maintenance logs, months of them, going back to the beginning. One entry, dated 11 months ago, read, Grid restoration projected Q2 next year for District 12 per PA bulletin. She will see the listing. Restocked beans and rice. I sat on the floor of 4A, on the bare concrete next to the sleeping bag that smelled like someone alive. And I read every entry in the maintenance log. And by the time I was done, I knew two things. First, this person had been living across the hall from my empty apartment for at least 20 months, maintaining it with the discipline of a building superintendent and the devotion of something I didn't want to name. Second, I had no idea who they were. There was no name in the logs, no personal items beyond the stove and the water and the sleeping bag. No indication of gender, age, relationship to me, or motive beyond the single operational assumption that animated every entry. She will come back. I waited. I know after 2 years of efficient movement, of clean evacuations, of never once driving back, I planted myself in a dead woman's apartment and waited for the person who'd been keeping it alive. I told myself I was being strategic. I told myself I needed information before acting. But the truth is simpler and worse. I wanted to see their face when they saw me. I wanted to know if it would be recognition or surprise. Because recognition would mean they knew me, and surprise would mean they'd been doing all of this for a stranger. I couldn't decide which possibility was more frightening. 3 days. I kept to the apartment, went out only to fill water from the functioning tap. The pipes groaned, but produced and ate through the provisions slowly. I watched the street from the window. The neighborhood was in the early phase of reoccupation. A few buildings on Commerce had lights. A provisional checkpoint had been set up at the Broadway intersection 6 blocks south. And once I saw a family, mother, father, 2 kids walking past with a handcart full of belongings, heading north. They didn't look up. On the 3rd evening, I heard the stairwell door on 3. I'd left my door cracked. An inch, enough to hear. The footsteps were measured. Not heavy, not light. The careful cadence of someone who knew which stairs creaked. They paused at the 4th floor landing. I heard the latch click, the one they'd installed, and the fire door eased open. And the footsteps entered the hallway. They stopped at 4A first. I heard the door open. A pause, maybe 30 seconds. The door closed. Then the footsteps crossed the hall. My door moved. He was maybe 50. Thin in the way people got thin now, not starved, but paired. Gray hair cut short with a blade, not scissors. Clean shaven. He was carrying a canvas bag in one hand, and he was reaching for the doorknob with the other, when the door swung inward from the momentum of his approach. And he saw me standing in the kitchen. And he went completely still. Not surprise, not recognition. Something else. Something I have spent weeks trying to name, and the closest I can get is confirmation. Like a doctor reading a test result he already suspected. His face didn't change. His body didn't startle. He just stopped and looked at me, and his eyes were steady and calm, and terribly, terribly relieved. "The breakers," he said. "Did 5 give you trouble?" I stared at him. "It trips if you run anything over 800 watts. I should have been more specific in the note." "Who are you?" I said. He set the canvas bag on the floor. Inside I could see cans, a fresh bar of soap, a small LED bulb still in its packaging. Provisions. Restocking. "My name is Martin Krall," he said. "I was the building manager here. Before." Martin Krall. I searched my memory. I'd lived in the Whitfield for 2.5 years before the outbreak. I'd interacted with building management maybe 4 times: a leaking faucet, a package delivery issue, the annual fire inspection. I could not picture the face of the person I'd spoken to during any of those interactions. "You don't remember me," he said. It wasn't a question. No. He nodded. He didn't seem hurt by this. He seemed to have expected it. I processed your lease application, he said. October 2019. You were the most prepared applicant I'd ever seen. Credit report, references, employment verification, 3 months bank statements, all organized in a labeled binder. I had done that. I remembered the binder. I did not remember the man who'd received it. I kept this building for 6 years, Martin said. Every unit, every tenant. I knew the names, the lease terms, the maintenance histories. That was my job. And then everyone left, and the building was empty, and the dead walked the streets, and I was still here because this is where I live. 4A. I've been in 4A since before you moved in. I looked at him. 4A is across the hall. Yes. You've been living across the hall from my apartment for 2 years. Longer than that. I've been in 4A for 8 years. You moved in across from me. We shared a wall. I heard your alarm clock in the mornings. 6:15. 6:15. He was right. That had been my alarm. The room was getting smaller. Not literally, but the air was thickening with the weight of what he was telling me, which was that I had lived 12 feet from this man for 2.5 years and never known his name, never registered his face, never built a single note of connection to the person who heard my alarm through the wall every morning. Why? I said. It was the only word I had. Martin Krall looked at me with those steady, calm eyes, and then looked past me at the kitchen counter, at the light on the counter, and said, because someone had to keep it. He talked. I let him. Martin had ridden the outbreak in the building. Literally in it never left. He'd sealed the stairwell, barricaded the lobby, lived on the 4th floor with whatever he'd had in his own apartment and whatever he scavenged from the others once it was clear no one was coming back. He'd been a building manager for 22 years across 3 properties. Before that, Army Corps of Engineers, enlisted 8 years. Infrastructure maintenance was not a skill he'd learned. It was the way his brain organized reality. The building is a system, he said. He was sitting on my couch now, my couch with his hands on his knees and his posture very straight. Every system degrades without maintenance. Pipes corrode, seals dry out, electrical connections loosen. I couldn't maintain all of it. I didn't have the parts or the power. But I could maintain some of it. I chose this floor. Why this floor? Because it's mine. And because... He stopped. Reconsidered. Because the other floors had damage I couldn't reverse. Forced entry. Water intrusion from broken windows. The 4th floor was intact. I could keep it intact. And my apartment specifically. He looked at the counter again. The light had shifted. It was past the golden hour now, thinning toward dusk. Your apartment was the only one on this floor that felt like someone was coming back to it, he said. The others, 4B is a couple who retired to Florida before the outbreak. 4D was vacant. 4E was a short-term rental, corporate lease, no personal effects. But yours had... He paused. You left books on the nightstand. There were photos on the refrigerator. The closet was full. You left like you were coming back in the morning. I left like I was running. Yes, but everything you left said you expected to return. I sat with that. He wasn't wrong. I'd packed my go bag, and I'd driven away, and I'd left everything else exactly as it was. Clothes in the closet, dishes in the cabinet, a half-finished crossword on the coffee table. I'd left like someone stepping out, not someone leaving. Because in my mind, I wasn't leaving. I was optimizing. I was removing myself from an inefficient situation, and I would return when the situation was resolved. Except I hadn't returned. For 25 months. The utility payments, I said. When the Provisional Authority established the billing grid, I registered as building superintendent. The residential exemption allowed me to maintain one unit besides my own as an active tenancy for returning residents. I listed yours. Why? Because if the account lapsed, the unit would be flagged for redistribution. The PA is resettling downtown. They'd have assigned someone else. New lock, new tenant. Everything you left would have been cleared. I understood the mechanics. I didn't understand the motive. Or rather, I understood the motive he was giving me. And it didn't account for the photograph on his wall. It didn't account for 23 months of meticulous logging and careful restocking and a note under the kitchen table about loose grout. Martin, I said, the photo in your apartment. His posture didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted. Not guilt, not embarrassment. Something closer to exhaustion. The weariness of someone who has been carrying a weight so long that setting it down requires more effort than continuing to hold it. I printed that from the company website, he said. Early on, before the servers went dark, I needed a reference photo to remember which apartment was yours. You could have written the unit number on a piece of paper. I could have. Long pause. The photo helped me remember why I was doing it. Not who you are. I don't know who you are. But a face is different from a number. A face makes it a promise instead of a task. I wanted to be angry. The anger was right there, available, its shape familiar and clean. But what came instead was something muddier, a recognition that this man had done something I was constitutionally incapable of doing. He had stayed. He had maintained. He had organized his entire existence around the preservation of a space for another person. And the person he'd chosen was someone who had never once looked at him while she lived 12 feet away. The irony was not subtle. The woman who had designed her life so that no one was load-bearing had become the load-bearing wall of a stranger's entire psychological architecture. I asked Martin to leave. Not the building, the apartment. My apartment. He nodded, picked up his canvas bag without taking anything out of it, and crossed the hall to 4A. He closed his door quietly. I closed mine. I stood in the kitchen and pressed my forehead against the cabinet above the sink and breathed. Here is the thing I have to say now that I've been avoiding. My mother made it out of Murfreesboro. I know this because 8 months after the outbreak, her name appeared on a survivor registry out of Tullahoma. I saw it on a list. Her name, her date of birth, her listed status. Ambulatory, uninjured, registered dependent, none. I read it during a shift at the coordination center. I noted it. I filed the information in the same mental cabinet where I filed everything. Confirmed, processed, archived. I did not go to Tullahoma. I did not request a transfer. I did not even send a message through the interzone communication system that the PA had established by then. A slow, unreliable mail relay network, but functional. I could have written her a letter. I could have said, I'm alive. I'm 60 miles away. I'm sorry I didn't come back for you. I didn't. For 17 more months, I didn't. I processed forms. I optimized systems. I made the intake operation at Cookville the most efficient in the eastern region. And Dennis told me I was invaluable, and I let that be enough. So when I say that Martin Krall maintained my apartment for 25 months on the assumption that I deserved to come home to it, I need you to understand the weight of what he got wrong. He built a shrine to the idea of someone returning. And the person who returned was me. A woman who had left without looking back, who had confirmed her mother's survival and filed it like paperwork, who had not called her brother the night the world ended, because she was too busy leaving a voicemail about server backups. Martin saw the apartment and imagined a person worth waiting for. The apartment held that story because I'd left it full closet, full bookshelf, photos on the fridge. A life that looked like it mattered to someone. And it did matter to me, in the way that all my things mattered to me, neatly, efficiently, and without requiring anything from anyone else. He had kept the apartment of a ghost, and the ghost had come back, and she was exactly as hollow as the day she'd left. That night, I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling and knew something was shifting under me, plate tectonic and slow, and I couldn't stop it. The apartment was the same. The light was the same. But Martin Kroll existed across the hall, and his existence rearranged the physics of this place in a way I couldn't optimize my way out of. I started spending time in the building. Not in the apartment, in the building itself. The stairwells, the lobby, the mechanical room in the basement where the gas line came in, and the water heater stood like a cast-iron monument to a civilization that once considered hot showers unremarkable. Martin had maintained the mechanical systems with a competence that bordered on devotion. The gas line had been cleaned and resealed. The water heater's pilot assembly had been rebuilt using parts cannibalized from the unit in the basement of the commercial building next door. The main water shutoff had a hand-lettered sign. Quarter turn only. Valve is fragile. Replace spring 26 if available. He was planning ahead. Not days, seasons. I found Martin in the lobby on the second morning, replacing a hinge on the front door. He had a small toolkit, wrenches, screwdrivers, a hand drill laid out on a towel on the floor with the precision of surgical instruments. He didn't look up when I came down the stairs. "I'm going to the PA checkpoint on Broadway," I said. "Do you need anything?" "Sealant tape if they have it. Plumber's grade." I went. The checkpoint was a staffed post with a supply distribution window, a message board, and a bored National Guard corporal who checked my Cookville ID and waved me through. I filed a housing reclamation form for the Whitfield building, technically unnecessary since Martin had maintained the active tenancy. But I wanted the paperwork clean. The clerk, a young woman with tired eyes, told me the fourth floor of my building was listed as occupied maintained under a superintendent exemption filed by one Martin Kroll. "He's been filing monthly status reports for almost 2 years, she said, scrolling through a terminal. Unit condition, utility status, structural notes. Very thorough. We don't get reports this detailed from buildings with full-time staff." "He's very thorough," I said. I got the sealant tape. I also picked up a week's ration pack and, on impulse, a second one. When I brought it back to the building, Martin was still working on the hinge. I set the second ration pack on the lobby desk. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I know." That afternoon, I sat in the lobby and watched him work, and I asked him questions. Not about me, about the building, about the 2 years. He answered in the same measured way he did everything precisely, without flourish, giving exactly the information requested, and no more. He told me about the first winter, when the pipes on the 6th floor burst and he had to isolate the damage to prevent cascading failure. He told me about the infected that had wandered into the lobby in month 4, 2 of them, slow, already deteriorating, and how he'd led them out through the back service entrance with a flashlight and a trail of noise like herding cattle, and then latched the door behind them. "You didn't kill them," I said. "They were leaving. They just needed direction." He told me about the worst night, month 9. A group living, not infected, tried to force the lobby entrance. 4 men. They wanted the building for shelter. Martin had barricaded the front door and sat in the stairwell with a pipe wrench and listened to them try to break through for 6 hours. They gave up at dawn. "What would you have done if they'd gotten in?" I asked. "I don't know. I had the wrench, but 4 men. He shook his head. I think I would have shown them the building, offered the 5th floor, tried to negotiate. But you barricaded instead. Yes. He tightened the hinge, tested the door's swing, adjusted. I barricaded because I was afraid. I negotiated with the scenario afterward, in my head, all night. By morning, I'd convinced myself I would have been reasonable. But in the moment, I locked the door. I recognize this. Not the specifics, the structure, the retroactive narrative. The way we rebuild our worst moments into something more palatable after the fact. I'd done it with my mother. I'd done it with Garrett. I'd done it with every person I'd passed on the road out of Nashville who might have needed help. We tell ourselves we would have, given more time, given better odds, given a slightly different set of variables. The optimization of hindsight. Martin and I were the same kind of broken. We just expressed it in opposite directions. I left and kept moving. He stayed and kept maintaining. Both of us building architecture around an absence we couldn't face. On day 8, I found the second ledger. I wasn't snooping, or I was, but with permission, in a way. Martin had asked me to help him check the water lines on the 3rd floor, where he suspected a slow leak was undermining the ceiling of 3D. We were in the mechanical closet between 3C and 3D, and I was holding the flashlight while he traced a pipe joint. And the beam caught a shelf I hadn't noticed. On the shelf was a metal lockbox, the kind you'd keep petty cash in. It wasn't locked. Inside was another ledger. Same yellow legal pad paper, same handwriting. But this one wasn't about my apartment. It was a tenant registry. Every unit in the building, listed by number. And beside each unit, a name, a lease date, and a status notation. Most read evacuated unconfirmed or evacuated confirmed via registry. 2 read deceased confirmed with dates. 1, 6. A read deceased in unit removed to roof. Buried under cairn. March year 1. Martin had buried a tenant on the roof. I looked at him. He was still focused on the pipe joint, his back to me. I kept reading. The entry for 4C, my unit read, Nora Kavanaugh. Lease October 2019. Evacuated night of day 1. Status alive, confirmed via Cookeville Regional Coordination Center roster, month 8. Month 8. He'd known I was alive since month 8. The same time I'd confirmed my mother's survival and done nothing. But Martin had done something. He'd found my name on a roster, the same kind of roster where I'd found my mother's, and instead of filing the information and moving on, he'd continued maintaining my apartment. He'd started paying the utility bill. He'd begun stocking provisions, because knowing I was alive turned the project from grief work into preparation. And here's the entry that unmade me. Below mine, in smaller handwriting, as if added later, was a second entry for 4C. Not mine, a different name. Elise Kavanaugh, listed as next of kin on lease application, relationship, mother. Address, Murfreesboro, TN. Status, alive confirmed, via Tullahoma Recovery Zone Registry, month 11. He had looked up my mother. Below that, Garrett Kavanaugh, listed as emergency contact on lease application. Relationship, brother. Address, Chattanooga, TN. Status, alive confirmed via Hamilton County Survivor Census, month 14. He had found my brother. He had tracked my family through the same registries and rosters and census lists that I had access to. The same systems I worked in every day. He had located my mother and my brother and noted their survival, and he had never contacted them and never told me and never done anything with the information except write it in a ledger and keep it in a lockbox in a mechanical closet on the 3rd floor. Martin, my voice was flat. He turned from the pipe. I held up the ledger, open to the page. His face didn't change. That steady, exhausted calm. You saw it. You knew where my mother was, for over a year. You knew where my brother was. Yes. Did you contact them? No. Why? Because they're your family, not mine. I maintained the apartment. I didn't maintain your relationships. I stood there in the mechanical closet with the flashlight shaking in my hand and tried to find the anger again, that clean shape. And this time, it came. But it came wrong. It came aimed at myself. Because he was right. He had done exactly what he'd set out to do, kept the building, kept the apartment, kept the door open. Everything beyond that was mine to do. Had always been mine to do. And I hadn't done it. Martin Krall, building manager, had organized the architecture of my return. But he could not make me a person worth returning to. That was my job. That had always been my job. And I had been a WOL from it for 25 months. I called my mother from the PA Checkpoint's communication relay the next morning. The relay system was glacial voice message recorded, transmitted via the interzone network, delivered within 24 to 48 hours. I stood in the small recording booth and held the receiver and said, "Mom, it's Nora. I'm in Nashville. I'm at my apartment. I've been in Cookville this whole time. I know you're in Tullahoma. I'm sorry it took me this long. I'm sorry." I recorded it. I played it back. I recorded it again because the first version sounded like a form letter, and the second version sounded like a hostage tape, and the third version sounded like me, which was worse. But I sent it anyway. Then I called Garrett. "Hey, it's your sister. I'm alive. I've been alive this whole time. I should have called you the first night. I didn't. I don't have a good reason. I just didn't. I'm in Nashville. I'm at my old apartment. If you can get here, or if you want me to come there, just send word. I'll come." I hung up and walked out of the booth and stood in the July sun on Broadway, which was beginning to look like a street again. PA vehicles moving, a few storefronts with plywood replaced by glass, a crew repainting lane lines on the asphalt. And I felt like I'd swallowed a fistful of glass, and the glass was working its way through me, and it was going to take a very long time. When I got back to the building, Martin was on the roof. The roof was flat, tarred, with a low parapet wall. In one corner, near the HVAC housing, was a small cairn of stacked bricks, neatly arranged, about 2 feet high, with a flat piece of stone on top. The 6A tenant. Martin had carried the body up 4 flights and buried it under a cairn he'd built by hand from bricks salvaged from a collapsed building on the next block. He was sitting near the parapet, looking south toward the river. I sat down next to him. We were quiet for a while. The river was visible in the distance, gray-green, indifferent. "I was in the Army for 8 years, Martin said. Fort Campbell, mostly. Infrastructure. We built things, roads, bridges, water systems. The work was," he searched, "legible. You could see what you'd done at the end of the day. A road existed where it hadn't before. A bridge held weight. A pump moved water. I waited. When I got out, I managed buildings. Same thing, smaller scale. Keep the system running, keep the tenants comfortable. Invisible work mostly. Nobody notices the building manager until the heat goes out." He picked at the tar on the roof surface. "I had a wife for 11 years. She left in 2017. Said I was more attentive to the boiler than to her. She wasn't wrong. Martin, I'm telling you this because you asked me why. And I gave you the clean answer, and you deserve the real one." He looked at me. After the outbreak, I was alone in this building with 16 empty apartments and a city full of the dead, and nothing to maintain except walls and pipes. And I was fine. I know how to be alone. I've been alone most of my life. But the building with nobody in it was... He stopped, started again. A building without people is just materials. Brick and pipe and wire. It doesn't mean anything. I needed someone to come back. I needed the building to be for something. And you chose me. I chose the apartment that looked like someone was coming back. I didn't choose you. I chose the evidence of you. The full closet, the books, the alarm clock I heard through the wall. I maintained the idea that this building still had a purpose, and your apartment was the proof. I understood then. Not fully, I don't think I'll ever fully understand what it means to organize 2 years of your life around the hypothetical return of a stranger. But I understood the shape of it. The building was his version of my go-bag. His version of my clean evacuation. A system to maintain so he didn't have to face the silence. We were the same. We'd just been running in opposite directions. "Martin," I said. "The person who lived in 4C before the outbreak. The woman who organized her lease application in a labeled binder and set her alarm for 6:15 and lived 12 feet from you for 2.5 years without learning your name, that person isn't coming back." He was quiet. "I'm someone else now. I don't know who yet. But the apartment you kept, it's a museum of someone who doesn't exist anymore." "I know," he said. "I knew that before you got here. I knew it wouldn't be the same person." "Then why?" "Because the apartment didn't know that. The building didn't know that. They just needed someone to come home." I stayed. Not because of Martin. Not because of the apartment. I stayed because leaving again would have been the same motion I'd been making for 25 months. The clean extraction, the efficient departure, the refusal to be load-bearing. And I was tired of that motion. I was tired of being a system that processed and archived and optimized and never, ever stayed in one place long enough to become necessary. I filed permanent residency paperwork with the PA. I requested a transfer from Cookville. Dennis approved it without comment, which told me he'd expected it, which told me he'd seen something in me that I hadn't, and I was reassigned to Nashville Reconstruction District 12 as a logistics coordinator. Same work, different city, the city I should have come back to a long time ago. Martin and I fell into a routine. Not a partnership, a cohabitation. Adjacent lives, parallel tracks. He maintained the building. I processed reconstruction logistics from a makeshift office the PA set up in the old Pinnacle Bank building 6 blocks north. We ate separately. We slept separately. But we shared the stairwell and the hallway and the mechanical room and the roof where 6A was buried. And slowly, the way a river changes the shape of a stone, the boundaries between our routines began to overlap. I helped him patch the 3rd-floor ceiling. He showed me how to relight the water heater pilot when it blew out in a draft. I brought supplies from the PA distribution. He cooked sometimes simple things, rice and beans, canned chicken heated on the camp stove, and left a portion on my doorstep without knocking. I ate it. We didn't talk about the photograph. We didn't talk about the ledger. We didn't talk about my mother or my brother. These were the silences that lived in the building alongside us, structural as the brick. 3 weeks after my arrival, I came home from the PA office and found a woman sitting on the front step of the Whitfield building. She was maybe 60, thin, sun-worn, with short gray hair and a canvas rucksack and shoes that had been walked to death. She was holding a piece of paper. "I'm looking for Martin Krall," she said. "He's inside. Who are you?" She held up the piece of paper. It was a printout PIA letterhead listing the Whitfield building's address, Martin's name as registered superintendent, and the notation active tenancy, maintained to returning residents may inquire. "My name is Donna Lyle," she said. "I lived in 5B for 3 years before. I've been in a camp in Clarksville since the first month. I saw this posting at the district office yesterday and I—" Her voice cracked. She pressed her lips together. "I didn't know the building was still standing." Martin appeared in the doorway behind me. He looked at Donna. She looked at him. And something happened in his face that I had never seen: a fracture in the steady calm, a micro-collapse, like a wall that had been holding weight, suddenly asked to hold more and discovering that it could. "Donna," he said, "5B. You had the corner unit, south-facing windows. You complained about the radiator every November." She made a sound that was either a laugh or a sob. "You never fixed it." "I fixed it twice. It was a design flaw. I told you." She stood up. She was crying. Martin stepped aside and led her into the building, and I watched her walk into the lobby and look around and put her hand on the wall, just flat against the brick, and stand there. Martin looked at me, and for the first time, I saw what this had been for him. Not a shrine, not an obsession, a proof of concept. If he could bring one person back, the building lived. If the building lived, the maintenance meant something. If the maintenance meant something, then the 2 years of sleeping on a concrete floor across from an empty apartment had not been grief. It had been work. Donna moved into 5B that week. Martin and I spent 2 days making it habitable, cleaning, checking electrical, replacing the window in the bedroom that had cracked during the first winter's freeze. Donna had nothing but her rucksack. The PA provided a cot, blankets, basic provisions. She stood in the empty apartment and cried, and then she stopped crying and started cleaning, and didn't stop until the floors shone. Within a month, 2 more former tenants contacted the building through the PA registry. One came back. The other sent word that she'd resettled in Memphis and wasn't returning. But she wanted Martin to know that she was glad the building was still standing. He read that message 3 times. Then he folded it and put it in the lockbox with the ledgers. My mother's reply came 18 days after my message. Voice relay, 41 seconds. Her voice was older than I remembered, or maybe I'd been remembering it wrong. She said, "Nora, I knew you were in Cookville. Your name was on their staff roster 8 months ago. I saw it at the Tullahoma district office. I didn't contact you either." Long pause. "I figured you had your reasons. You always have your reasons. I'm not angry. I was never angry. I was waiting for you to be ready. I'm still waiting. Come when you're ready. Or don't. But I'm here." I played the message 9 times. Then I sat on the floor of my apartment, the apartment Martin Krall had maintained for 25 months, for a woman who had never known his name. And I understood something that I think I'd been building an entire life to avoid understanding. She had known. My mother had known where I was, the same way I'd known where she was. And she had made the same choice I had to wait, to not reach out, to let the silence stand, except she hadn't done it out of efficiency or emotional architecture or the inability to be load-bearing. She'd done it because she knew me. She knew that I would not come until I was ready, and that pushing me would make me run further. And so she had waited. Not passively, deliberately. With the same discipline Martin had applied to the water heater and the stairwell latches and the loose grout by the stove. Everyone around me had been maintaining something. My mother had maintained the silence I needed. Martin had maintained the apartment I didn't know I'd need. Garrett. I didn't know yet what Garrett had maintained, but I suspected I'd find out. And I suspected it would break me the same way. And I had maintained nothing. I had maintained systems, logistics, databases, the clean, efficient machinery of other people's survival. But I had not maintained a single human connection in 25 months of aftermath. And the reason I hadn't was not that I couldn't. It was that maintaining a connection requires admitting you need it. And needing something means it can be taken away. And I had built my entire life before the outbreak, during the outbreak, after the outbreak, around the principle that nothing taken from me could collapse the structure. Martin had shown me what the opposite looks like. Not warmth, not intimacy, not love in any form I recognized. Just maintenance. The daily, invisible, thankless act of keeping something alive for someone who may never come back for it. I booked transport to Tullahoma for the following Tuesday. PIA convoy, supply run, room for passengers. I told Martin I'd be gone 4 days. He nodded. "I'll check the breakers while you're out," he said. "Martin." "Yes?" "When I get back, I want to help with the building. Properly, not just my floor, the whole building." He looked at me. Steady, calm. That confirmation again, not surprise, not gratitude. Just the quiet recognition of a system coming back online. "Okay," he said. "We'll start with the second floor plumbing. It's a mess." I packed my bag that night. Go bag again, same motion, same efficiency. But this time, I was packing to go somewhere and come back. Both directions. The full circuit. For the first time in my life, the evacuation had a return date. The building has 11 residents now. I know this because I maintain the registry. Martin and I split the work. He handles mechanical. I handle administrative and logistics. We still eat separately most nights, but on Thursdays, Donna cooks for whoever shows up, and whoever shows up has been growing. My mother came to Nashville in the fall. She didn't move into the building. She's in a PA housing unit on Demon Brunn, 12 blocks south. We see each other on weekends. We are careful with each other in a way that feels like learning a new language, slow, deliberate, full of pauses where the grammar hasn't been invented yet. Garrett is still in Chattanooga. He wrote me a letter. I carry it folded in my jacket pocket next to Martin's ledger. I haven't answered it yet. I will. I'm not ready. But I'm closer than I was. Martin still sleeps in 4A. I still sleep in 4C. The wall between us is thin enough to hear an alarm clock through. I set mine for 6:15. I don't think he knows I do that. Or maybe he does. And he lies there in the dark and hears it and feels the building breathing, and that's enough. It isn't love. I want to be clear about that. I don't know what it is. But every morning I hear the pipes groan when he runs the water. And I know the building is being kept. And I know I am part of what it's being kept for. And I know that I'm keeping it too. That's not a debt. It's a lease. And for the first time in my life, I intend to stay through the full term.